Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the Enermax MarbleShell MS31. Taking a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard I'm going to be using the ASUS ROG STRIX X670E e-gaming Wi-Fi. For the CPU I'm going to be using AMD's 7800X3D. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got 240mm AIO from Enermax. It's their LIQMAXFLO SR. For RAM, I've got 32GB of XPG's Lancer Blade DDR5 at 6000 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe drive from this build. It's from Samsung and it's their 990 Pro in 2TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I've got an 850W fully modular ATX 3.0 power supply from Enermax. It's their Revolution D.F.X 850. And for the graphics card, I'm going to be using the ASUS TUF Gaming RTX 4070 Ti. Okay, so that's all the parts. Let's make a start by taking a look at the case. Our tempered glass side panel is actually a door held on with magnets at the front. There's a little ring pull here you just need to pull to open the door up. And then for building, you can actually remove the door by lifting it up. To remove our other side panel, we've got two non-captive thumb screws on the back of the case that we're going to need to remove. And then we're going to be able to pull the panel backwards and lift away. Taking a look at the back of the panel we've just removed, you'll notice we've got this perforated area with a magnetically attached dust filter, indicating that we're going to be able to side mount fans on the case. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power and reset button, we've got a combined headphone and microphone jack, we've got two USB Type A ports and a single Type C port. On the top of the case, we've got a magnetically attached dust filter which can simply be pulled away. To remove our case's front panel, it's just a simple matter of pulling it off from the bottom. Beneath this, we've got another magnetically attached dust filter which can simply be pulled away. And you can see at the front of the case, Enermax have installed three 120mm PWM A-RGB fans. Now, if you prefer, you can see there is space here for bigger fans, and you can actually fit up to three 140mm fans or up to a 420mm radiator. At the rear of the case, we've got another 120mm A-RGB PWM fan pre-installed, but if you prefer, you can actually fit a 120mm radiator at the rear. Up top, it's up to three 120 or two 140mm fans, or up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. You can see we've got a large cutout on the side of the case. We're going to be able to mount up to two 120mm fans, while on the power supply side, we're going to be able to fit up to two 120mm fans. And you can see we've got the holes here for the fans, so you're going to set your fans on top and then use long radiator screws to screw down into the power supply shroud. The case supports motherboards up to E/ITX in size, and you want to go with a CPU cooler. The maximum height supported is 162mm. You can see at the rear of the case we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets, and the maximum length of graphics card supported is up to 420mm. Two more things to point out before we go through to the rear compartment. You can see our power supply is going to be visible at the front through this cutout. So when you're picking your power supply, make sure the side that's going to be on display is going to look good. The other thing to point out is that we do have rubber grommets over the two main cutouts to the right hand side of the motherboard. So in terms of the cutouts, they all do look to be in sensible places, but as I've mentioned, it's only the two cutouts to the right hand side of the motherboard that have rubber grommets on them. Cable routing space is 25mm, looks to be adequate, and we've got plenty of cable tie down points for managing our cables, as well as two Velcro cable straps in the middle. We've got our case accessory bag here, so I'll show you what it contains. So this is what comes in our case accessory box. So we've got plenty of cable ties for cable management. We've got a GPU support bracket with the Enermax logo on it. It's just a simple matter of twisting it round to where it supports your graphics card, and we do have a little rubber pad on the top of it. We've got all our screws for the build, and we've also got screws and rubber mounts for mounting 2.5-inch drives. Taking a look at our case cables, we've got our front panel connectors, which are all individual cables. We've got our HD audio cable to let the combined headphone and microphone port on the front of the case work. We've got our USB 3.0 cable to let the two Type A ports in the front of the case work, and our USB Type C cable. We can see that all the cables from our four pre-installed case fans have been daisy chained together, leaving us just one 4-pin PWM cable and one 3-pin 5V A-RGB cable to plug into our motherboard to allow us to power and control the speed of the fans and also the lighting, and these are highlighted by this silver bit of tape. And you can see coming from the cables, we've got one spare PWM connector and one spare 3-pin 5V A-RGB connector here to plug additional devices into, although I probably would advise against this. And as a general rule, I don't tend to plug any more than 3 fans into any one PWM or A-RGB header. So we take a look at the specs of our fans. It's up to 0.28 amps to power the fan and 0.24 amps for the A-RGB. So with our 4 fans, the 0.28 times 4 is 1.12 amps. So just be careful that the fan header on your motherboards can support this amount of power. So we take a look at our motherboard manual. You can see that all our fan headers, both the CPU and the system fan headers, only support up to a maximum current of 1 amp. So the 4 fans daisy chained together are actually going to be too much current for that header. So what I'm going to do is plug the rear fan in separately and the 3 front fans into a separate header. In terms of our A-RGB headers, we're not going to have any problem with 4 fans daisy chained together. Each header is up to 3 amps, so it just shows you the importance of checking your motherboard manual. You can see we've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounting locations behind the motherboard. To mount them, what you're going to do is take these little rubber pads and push them into the holes here. Next, you're going to want to take your SSD and screw a standoff into each corner, and then you're going to be able to line your SSD up with the rubber mounts and just push into place, and that's going to secure your drive in place. We've also got a hard drive cage down at the bottom of the case. To remove it, we need to remove this thumb screw, and then we're going to be able to pull the hard drive cage towards us to remove it from the case. So we take a closer look at our hard drive cage. On top of it, we've got holes for either a 2.5-inch drive or 3.5-inch drive. So all you're simply going to do is set your drive on top, either the 2.5-inch drive here or the 3.5-inch drive here. And then when you turn it over, you're going to use the screws in the case accessory bag to screw it in from underneath. You're also going to be able to fit a 3.5-inch drive in the drive tray itself, just a matter of slotting it in here. And then you'll see we've got holes on either side to secure the drive into place. Our power supply is going to go down at the bottom, and we've got these rubber mounts here for resting the power supply on. And the case is compatible with full-size ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 230 millimeters. Although if you go ahead and remove the hard drive cage, you've got absolutely loads of room for your power supply. And you can see down at the bottom, we do have a dust filter over our power supply's intake. It's just a simple sheet of mesh which is held on with all these little clips, and it can be removed for cleaning. To install our CPU, we're going to need to open the socket cover by pushing this lever down and out and bring it all the way to the middle of the motherboard, and then we're going to be able to open the socket cover up. Then we can take our CPU and lower it down carefully into the socket, making sure we've got the text the correct way up. And once we're happy it's sitting correctly in the socket, we can go ahead and close the cover back down again, and then we'll close the lever to secure our CPU in the socket and put the cover in the motherboard box for safekeeping. To install the bracket for our CPU killer, we're going to need to remove these 2 clips. They're each held on with 2 screws. And again, we're going to put these in the motherboard box for safekeeping. With our I/O, we get this little bag labelled AMD AM4/AM5, and then we're going to want to screw each of these thumb screws onto each corner. To install our M.2 SSD, we're going to need to remove the heatsink. It's held on with 2 screws. If you're using the motherboard from new, there'll be some plastic protection on this heat pad that you're going to need to remove. And then we can take our M.2 SSD, insert it into the slot at a slight angle, flatten it down, and then we're going to close this lever here to secure the drive in place. Again, if you're using the motherboard from new, there will be some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink to remove. We're going to be installing our RAM in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU, so we'll open the clips on these slots. Then we can line our RAM up with the slot, and once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. And then same thing with the 2nd stick. Next we can set the motherboard into the case, line it up with a standoff at the back, and then we're going to secure it into place with 9 of the screws with a little lip around the outside from the case accessory bag. Next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go in this header down the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header down the bottom right hand side of the motherboard. Just make sure you plug them in the same order as I'm showing you in the video, or you can refer to the diagram in your motherboard manual to help you. And then we can put all the excess cable through to the back. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place. And then just above it, we've got our front panel Type-C cable. So again, bringing the cable through the cutout, lining up with the header, and pushing into place. And again, pulling all the excess cable through to the back. So in terms of getting our fans plugged in, we've got a system fan header down here at the bottom of the motherboard. So I've unplugged our bottom fan from the 4 cables that were joined together, and I'm going to plug it in by itself into this header here. And in terms of our A-RGB cables, I've left all of the 4 fans plugged together. I'm going to bring the A-RGB cable coming from them through and plug it into this header here at the bottom. So we've got another system fan header here, so I'm going to bring the 3 fans that are still daisy chained together and plug them into here. We're now ready to install our power supply, so I've gone ahead and plugged in the cables that we're going to need. So I've plugged in our 24-pin motherboard cable, we've got 2 8-pin EPS cables, our 12-volt high power cable to supply our graphics card with power, and we've also plugged in our A-RGB sync cable. So this is our power supply's intake fan, so we're going to want to make sure we install it with this facing down where we can get cool air from the bottom of the case. And then we can secure our power supply into place before the large screws from the case accessory bag. Our 2 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into these headers at the top left of the motherboard, so we can go ahead and bring them through the cutout, line them up with the headers and push into place. And then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. And again, we'll just pull all the excess cable through to the back. And we've got another A-RGB header down at the bottom of the motherboard, so we can bring the A-RGB cable coming from our power supply through, plug it into the header, and again pull all the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to start working the I/O, and the first thing to do is set the fans onto the radiator, and we're going to want to make sure the cables are coming out towards the back of the case. Then we can use 8 of the long radiator screws to secure the fans to the radiator. Then we're going to want to daisy chain the fans together. And with the I/O in the box, we get this double splitter cable. So we're going to take the longer end and plug it into here. This end we're going to plug into the CPU fan header on the motherboard, and we've got this additional header here to plug the cable coming from our pump into. Then if we take a closer look at our pump, coming from it we've got 2 cables. The first is a PWM cable, and that's going to go into that splitter cable coming from the fans on the radiator. And the other is a 3-pin 5-volt A-RGB cable, and we're going to plug that into an A-RGB header on the motherboard. If you've got limited A-RGB headers, we've got an additional header here we can plug a further device in. So one header on the motherboard is going to be able to power the lighting on our pump, but also a further A-RGB device. So if we take a closer look at our pump, it's got this removable cover. It's magnetically attached, so it's just a simple matter of pulling it off. And this cover can go on anyway, so no matter what way you mount the I/O in the case, it's just a matter of swapping the cover round to the orientation that you want to have it in and pushing it into place. Behind this, we've got a fan which is going to help cool our VRM. And if we take a look at our cold plate, you'll notice the thermal paste has been pre-applied and we've got plastic protection on it. We're now going to need to install the bracket to allow us to attach the pump to the motherboard. This is the AMD bracket, and it just simply slots into place here. We can push it all the way over and it's going to clip into place. If you've got an Intel motherboard, there's separate back plates that come with the I/O. Final thing to mention is we do have some plastic protection on the I/O here, and I think it's probably going to be easier to remove it at this stage rather than wait until it's installed in the case. We can then set our I/O into place at the top of the case and secure it using 8 of the short radiator screws. We can then replace the dust filter at the top of the case. Next, I'm just going to pass the PWM cable coming from the fans and the radiator through to the back of the case. And we've got 3 fan headers at the top of the motherboard. The one furthest to the left is our CPU fan header. So we'll bring the cable back through and get it plugged into here. And then we'll pull all the excess cable through to the back. Next, we can remove the plastic protection from our I/O. I'm just going to route the cables around this top bracket, making sure they're not catching on the cold plate. And then just going to push the I/O over the brackets we've already secured to the motherboard. And then we need to get a thumb screw onto each corner. And then all we're going to need to do is tighten each corner up in turn. Next, I'm just going to route the cables coming from the pump through to the back of the case. We've got an A-RGB header here at the top of the motherboard, so we'll get the A-RGB cable plugged into here, and then we'll just push the additional cable coming from it through this rubber grommet. At the back of the case, we can plug the PWM cable coming from our pump into the PWM header coming from the double splitter cable we've already plugged in to the CPU fan header. And then we can replace our pump cover. Next, we've got a graphics card to install, so we're going to need to remove the 2nd and 3rd slot cover from the top. To do this, we're going to need to loosen this bracket here. That's going to let us slide this all the way to the front, and then we can get a screwdriver through here and remove the screws. And then we can simply remove the slot covers. With this particular motherboard, you don't need to open the clips in the PCIe slots. Whenever you insert the graphics card, it's just going to open itself. But if you do have a different motherboard, go ahead and press the clip on the top slot now. Then we can insert our graphics card into place, line it up with the top slot. And once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it's going to clip into place. And then we can secure the graphics card into place with 2 screws we removed earlier on. And then we can slide the bracket back into place and tighten up the thumb screw. Then we can bring our 12-volt high power cable through the cutout at the bottom, line it up with our graphics card, and push into place, making sure we're getting a nice click on the graphics card. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management, and we're going to want to make sure we take care not to have any cables show in through these 2 fan cutouts. Okay, so that's the build complete. If you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, the RGB software, enter the BIOS, update the BIOS, and adjust all the BIOS settings, I've made another video on that, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. But what I want to do now is take a look at the temperatures. So our 7800X 3D idled at 43 degrees and reached a maximum of 86 degrees during a 10-minute IDA64 stability test. The RTX 4070 Ti idled at 28 degrees and reached a maximum of 71 degrees during the stability test. In terms of noise levels, the average noise levels at idle were 33 decibels and under load they were 45 decibels. So temperatures are satisfactory and the noise levels are very good in this case, which tells me that the 4 pre-installed case fans that Enermax have gone with are actually a pretty good quality. They run nice and quiet both at idle and under load and do a good job of keeping our PC nice and cool. I'm not planning on doing a separate case review for this case, but what I will do is share my thoughts on it now. And in terms of the good things about this case, I think the good things are that it comes with 4 good pre-installed case fans. Also, in terms of the looks of the case, I think this is a reasonably good looking case, and I think as long as you choose pretty sensible components, particularly paying attention to your power supply, this Enermax one looks really good here with the RGB on it. You can come up with a pretty good looking build in the case. In terms of what I didn't like about the case, I think there's probably a few more things to mention here. And for me, this case has 3 major downfalls. I think probably the biggest and most noticeable one here is the fact that the tooling on this case is really from quite a number of years ago. We've got non-captive thumb screws on the solid side panel at the back of the case. And again, we've got large cutouts at the side which aren't actually covered over with anything. And the mechanism for the panels coming on and off isn't really up to modern standards. That set to the side, once you've actually built your PC in it, that shouldn't really affect it. And if you actually like the looks of the build and you can get the case for a good price, that wouldn't necessarily put me off. Another major thing I didn't like about the case was the large cutout over towards the right-hand side of the motherboard. And when you actually look through that, you can actually see out through the perforated panel at the back of the case. And really what I think they should have had is some cover plates over those cutouts. So if you're not installing fans on the side, which I imagine most people won't be doing, you're not going to see that. And actually you're going to have improved airflow by covering that panel over as well. Third thing I didn't like about this case, and a really strange decision, was actually to have the 4 pre-installed case fans all connected up to one PWM header. That's going to take you above 1 amp when you look at the rating on the fans, and for a number of motherboards, including the one that I use in this build, it's going to be exceeding what they're recommending. So really, a general rule is you're not going to want to connect more than 3 fans to any one fan header on a motherboard. There are certain motherboards where you can go up to 2 amps, but for most of them, not exceeding those 3 fans is a safe rule. And I just find this really surprising to come from a case manufacturer to actually have 4 fans connected to one header. And it would have been better just having the front 3 fans connected up together and the back fan separate. So should you go out and pick up this case? And I think it really depends on the price you can get it for. The MSRP of this case is $100, and that is far too expensive for a case that uses outdated tooling. Albeit said, you are getting 4 good A-RGB fans included with it. I think really you need to be picking this case up for around about the $50 to $60 price point to make it worth considering, because there is just too many good alternatives, much more modern cases, better looking cases in round about that $70 to $80 price point that I would go for over this one. So it really depends on the price you can get it for. If you like the look of it and you can get it for a budget price, you'll be getting a reasonably good looking case with 4 good A-RGB PWM fans included in it. So hopefully you have enjoyed this full step-by-step PC build guide. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.